Normandy in June 1944 and their eventual breakout into the rest of France in August, German forces occupying important coastal towns and cities on the French coast faced a quandary. If they stayed put, these men defending the remaining sections of the Atlantic Wall in Europe faced certain encirclement as Allied forces battled up the coast as well as lunging east towards Germany. A hasty evacuation of the units and their equipment would have been the sensible option, so that the divisions could join with the main German forces defending the Western Front. But Hitler would not contemplate simply abandoning ports that the Germans had spent 4 years reinforcing. On the 4th of September 1944, he ordered them declared Festungen, or fortresses. The garrisons were to stay put and deny the ports to the enemy. Aside from trying to complicate Allied supply efforts in France by denying them access to good port facilities, several of the towns also had U-boat bases, and though firmly on the back foot since the defeat of the U-boats in the Battle of the Atlantic in 1943, German submarines remained a significant threat to Allied shipping. Cherbourg fell to the Americans on the 29th of June. Dieppe and Ostend eventually fell to the Allies without opposition, but Le Havre, Boulogne, Calais and Dunkirk would have to be taken in set-piece and costly assaults. Le Havre fell to the British First Corps on the 12th of September after a 48-hour battle. The Canadian 2nd Infantry Division assaulted Boulogne between the 17th and the 22nd of September, the city being pounded to ruins by artillery and airstrikes. Calais was isolated in early September, and the city was captured by the Canadians after a 5-day fight on the 30th of September, and the infamous Cap Cohinet artillery batteries that had been bombarding Dover in England for years were finally silenced. Several ports successfully held out under siege, including La Rochelle and Dunkirk. Dunkirk in particular proved to be the toughest nut to crack. In late May to early June 1940, Dunkirk had been the scene of fierce fighting as the British Expeditionary Force and its French allies had retreated through the town to the port and its long beaches. Under violent air attack for days from the German Luftwaffe and with thousands of men holding the perimeter, over 338,000 British and French troops were evacuated to Britain to fight again. 4 years later, and Canadian forces reached the outskirts of the city on the 7th of September 1944. The Germans had heavily fortified the harbour and its approaches, and the German garrison was large and well armed. On the 15th of September, a new German commander arrived by sea in Dunkirk, Vice Admiral Friedrich Frisius, former commander of all defences in the Pas-de-Calais region. He was absolutely determined that Dunkirk would not capitulate or be captured, and his severe leadership put iron into the German defence. Festung Dunkerque's garrison consisted of about 14,000 men from a variety of units, amounting to basically a division of German troops. As well as the garrison troops, there were the remains of 5 German infantry divisions shattered in Normandy and elsewhere. Frisius, with his army chief of staff, Colonel von Wittstadt, divided the men into 5 combat groups or Kampfgruppen, each several battalions strong. The inner Festung, the port of Dunkirk, was held by Kampfgruppe Nettelbach, commanded by Kapitän José Schneider. A series of German strongpoints stretched 10 miles north along the coast to Newport and East Dunkirk, and a perimeter of heavily defended villages protected all approaches to Dunkirk from the southwest. The German front line running through the villages of Mardyke, Luneplage, Speicher, Berge and Bray Dunes, between 4.5 and 7.5 miles from Dunkirk, held in strength by the remaining 4 German Kampfgruppen, including some 2,000 Waffen-SS troops. The Germans had sufficient supplies to hold out until August 1945. Artillery commander Lieutenant Colonel Krause had at his disposal 85 guns, ranging in caliber from 75 to 200 millimeters. There were also 97 anti-tank guns and over 100,000 hand grenades on strength. It would be the task of Canadian troops to try and capture Dunkirk. However, in mid-September, all Allied efforts turned to the capture of Antwerp in Belgium on the Scheldt estuary, and the Canadians were told to isolate Dunkirk. Units rotated, taking turns to contain the German garrison and launching small-scale assaults to attempt to push in the German perimeter around the city. The first Canadian successes were in early September. On the 7th to 8th of September, the 5th Canadian Infantry Brigade captured the town of Bourbourg, 8 miles from Dunkirk. At the same time, Canadian battalions began to batter away at the fortified villages forming the German outer perimeter. The Calgary Highlanders' assault on Luneplage was terrible. German opposition was so fierce that all of its companies were reduced to less than 30 men each. On the 9th of September, Luneplage fell, but only because the Germans withdrew. More Canadian attacks followed. Koppen-Axford was captured on the 9th of September. Mardyke fell on the 17th. Berge was taken on the 15th, and Vuren, Newport and Depan fell soon afterwards. After false starts, the Canadians seized Bray Dunes and Guyvelde on the 15th. In total, the Canadians suffered about 300 casualties during these assaults. But the German defences were still formidable, and after the fall of Ostend to the Canadians, Dunkirk didn't seem worth the effort, and the price, blood and treasure. The decision was taken to place the city under siege. The worrying thing was the German garrison was not prepared to simply wither on the vine. It mounted a spirited and energetic defence that included several well-planned raids. For example, when the Germans became aware that Canadian troops were changing over with British Highlanders, Vice Admiral Frisius ordered assaults on Guyvelde and Bray Dunes Plage. At Bray Dunes, the Germans managed to capture the 7th Battalion Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders headquarters, and in Guyvelde several houses were destroyed in heavy fighting before the 51st Highland Division's 154th Infantry Brigade managed to push the Germans back and restore their line. From the 3rd to the 6th of October 1944, with winter having arrived, Frisius arranged a truce with the British and permitted the evacuation of 17,500 French civilians and wounded Germans from the city. This eased their suffering, but also freed Frisius from the need to feed them, freeing up more supplies for his own men, as well as removing remaining non-combatants from the battle area. On the 9th of October, Czechoslovak troops arrived to keep up the siege, men of the 1st Czechoslovak Armoured Brigade. All-out fighting soon resumed. The Czechs were active in launching raids in force. During one operation on the 28th of October, the Czechs captured 300 German prisoners. The heaviest fighting was along the eastern perimeter, but conditions were far from ideal. The ground was waterlogged, it rained and snowed, and Czech morale sank. Admiral Frisius decided to launch a full-scale attack out of his perimeter. By early April 1945, Nazi Germany was on its last legs. The Red Army was barely 80 miles east of Berlin, and the British, Canadian, American and French armies were well into Germany. Dunkirk was completely isolated, but unbowed, one of the last pieces of France still held by Hitler's forces. Frisius ruled his Festung with an iron will, and morale was remarkably good considering the dire straits the garrison was in. Frisius chose the name Blücher for the operation, and the offensive was set for dawn on the 5th of April 1945. In one of the last offensive actions, the Western Front, 4 German Kampfgruppen burst from their positions, supported by a strong artillery barrage, and stormed the unsuspecting Czech front line. At several points round the perimeter, German infantry broke through. Czech resistance was fierce, but the German assault was very strong. They began to recapture their old perimeter that had fallen to Canadian troops in September 1944. And when news of the German offensive reached British headquarters, panic set in. The weak Czech brigade was outnumbered by the attacking German forces. Canadian forces were sent to help the Czechs, along with Typhoon ground attack aircraft from the Royal Air Force. And as a precaution, engineers began blowing up bridges around the Dunkirk perimeter in an effort to slow and then contain the German advance. The Czechs and Canadians counterattacked with massive air cover, but they could not dislodge the Germans from their new positions. In total, the Czechoslovaks lost 167 men killed, 40 missing, and 461 wounded in this battle. Frisia's offensive had seen the Dunkirk garrison fight forward 10 miles into the Allied lines before halting and digging in. Fighting continued until the 4th of May 1945, but the German positions held firm. But just 4 days later, the German armed forces surrendered, and the war in Europe came to an end. The Dunkirk garrison held out for one more day before Admiral Frisius surrendered on the 9th of May 1945. Around 1,000 of his men had become casualties during the 9-month siege. 21 battalions laid down their arms on the 9th of May. The Germans still had 21 tons of provisions in storage, good for a further 3 months of fighting. 542 wounded Germans and 141 sick were found in the city's military hospital.